Good afternoon and welcome to the National Press Club. I'm Jonathan Salant, a reporter for Bloomberg News and the immediate past president of the club. I'd like to welcome club members and their guests in the audience today, as well as those you watching on C-SPAN. We're looking forward to today's speech, and afterwards, I will ask as many questions from the audience as time permits. Please hold your applause during the speech, so we have time for as many questions as possible. For our broadcast audience, I'd like to explain that if you hear applause, it is from the guests and the members of the general public who attend our luncheons, not from the working press. I'd now like to introduce our head table guests and ask them to stand briefly when their names are called. From your right, Suzanne Struglinski of the Deseret Morning News and president of the Regional Reporters Association, Tonya Fitzpatrick, Deputy Assistant Secretary for the U.S. Department of Education and the host of the Traveling On radio show on WWRC, Kathleen Matthews, Executive Vice President for Global Communications and Public Affairs of Marriott International, Jennifer Habercorn of the Washington Times, Roger Dow, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Travel Industry Association, Gil Klein, a past president of the National Press Club and editor of the club's centennial book, Reliable Sources. Skipping over our speaker for a moment, Deborah Silameo, Senior Vice President of Hager Sharp and the Press Club's Speakers Committee member who organized today's luncheon. And Deborah, thank you very much for your work. Arnie Sorensen, Chief Financial Officer of Marriott, Lorraine Wohlert, my colleague at Bloomberg News, Andy Glass, Senior Editor at Politico, Pat Cheney, Executive Director of the National Coalition on Healthcare and Chair of the National Press Club's Travel Committee, and Jim Asiendo, News Director of WAMU 88.5. Decades ago, when my family drove from New York to Washington, we'd stop at the service areas along Interstate 95 at the signs that said, "Hot Shoppies." Years later, I learned two things. First, they were the seedlings of what would grow into one of the world's largest hotel chains, a $16 billion corporation, Marriott International. And second, they were pronounced hot shops. Today, instead of hot shops and Roy Rogers and Rustler Steakhouses and, alas, Farrell's ice cream parlors, the Marriott's name means Ritz-Carlton and Renaissance and Residence Inn and Courtyard. Today, Marriott is to hotels what McDonald's is to fast food. And if you ever forget the name of the company's founder, just look at the hotel next to the press club, the J.W. Marriott. Today's speaker, John Willard Marriott, Jr., known as Bill, is the son of the person whose name is on that hotel. Bill Marriott is the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Marriott International. The company is regularly named by Fortune magazine as one of the best places to work. As Mr. Marriott told the Washington Post, its basic Christian principles: treating your people right, loving your people, and if you love them, they'll do anything for you, and your customers will get wonderful service. Marriott is in the midst of an effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 1 million tons by the end of the decade. He has pushed for simpler ways for foreign visitors to enter the United States and for ways to allow undocumented immigrants to stay here legally. The Marriotts are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and you'll find the Book of Mormon in their hotel rooms alongside the Gideon Bible. For president, they're supporting fellow LDS Church member Mitt Romney, whose given name is Willard, named for the original J. Willard Marriott. In fact, Governor Romney used to sit on the Marriott board. And unlike other hotel chains, Marriott has refused to enter the gaming industry. Still, Mr. Marriott has been criticized because the televisions at his hotels contain adult content. Mr. Marriott and his daughter, Donna, have 3 sons and a daughter, all of whom work in the family business. One answer we're waiting for is whether one of them will take over the company when Mr. Marriott retires. As for the immediate future, Mr. Marriott is planning boutique hotels with designer Ian Schrager. As the father of a 10-year-old, I'm much more excited about his plans to open a chain of family-oriented resorts with Nickelodeon. And Mr. Marriott, I understand you shared the stage with SpongeBob and got slimed. There's a story Mr. Marriott often tells, but he's not going to tell it today, so I will. A traveling salesman comes to breakfast in the hotel dining room and asks the waitress for some eggs over easy and some kind words. She comes back with the food, and as she turns to leave, the salesman says, "What about those kind words?" The waitress replies, "Don't eat them eggs." Let's welcome Bill Marriott to the National Press Club.
Thank you, Jonathan, for those kind words. It's really great to be here in Washington, my hometown, with so many friends from the hospitality industry and the press and news. I'm a little bit of a news junkie, I guess, and I love to read newspapers. I'm one of the few left that does, I presume, but during my vacation during the holidays in Florida, they sent me up as many newspapers in the hotel they could find, and I got a big kick, of course, out of reading the New York Post, which you never read here in Washington. But I did run across an analysis of various newspapers, which some of you may have heard before. And this little survey talks about the many newspapers that come across our desks and says that the Wall Street Journal is read by people who run the country. The Washington Post is read by people who think they run the country. The New York Times is read by people who think they should run the company and who are very good at crossword puzzles. The USA Today is read by people who think they ought to run the country and don't really understand the New York Times. They do, however, like their statistics shown in pie charts. The LA Times is read by people who wouldn't mind running the country if they could find the time and they didn't have to leave Southern California to do it. The Boston Globe is read by people whose parents used to run the country and did a very poor job of it. Thank you very much. The New York Daily News is read by people who aren't too sure who's running the country and don't really care, as long as they can get a seat on the train. The New York Post is read by people who don't care who is running the country, as long as they do something really scandalous, preferably while intoxicated. The San Francisco Chronicle is read by people who aren't sure if there is a country or that anyone is running it, but if so, they oppose all that they stand for. The National Enquirer is read by people trapped in line at the grocery store. And finally, the Oregonian is read by people who recently caught a fish and need something in which to wrap it. Let me begin today by offering my congratulations to the National Press Club on their 100th birthday this year. My mother, Alice Sheets Marriott, would have celebrated her 100th birthday last year. And not a day goes by when I don't think about her great contribution in helping establish Marriott International. She was called Allie by her friends and her family, and she and my dad, J. Willard Marriott, drove across the United States from Salt Lake City to Washington in 1927 in a Model T Ford to open up a 9-stool root beer stand. It took them 11 days. I don't think they ever hit a paved road till they got just outside of Washington. My mother used to tell me they'd go up the hill, and every hill they went up, the radiator would boil over, and they'd have to find a drainage ditch someplace to find water to put back in the radiator. And when they got here, the root beer stand was off to a great start. It actually opened on the same day Lindbergh flew the Atlantic, May 20th, 1927. The root beer sold for 5 cents a mug, but the weather got cold and people stopped drinking root beer. So to stay in business, they had to put hot food on their menu. So they put on chili and hot tamales, which my mother cooked in her own kitchen in her apartment because there was no kitchen in the root beer stand. And the root beer stand then became the #1 A&W Mexican root beer stand in America. My mom actually got the recipes from the Mexican embassy, which was on 16th Street, because she'd studied Spanish at the University of Utah. Well, that was the beginning of the hot shoppies, or the hot shops, and the company continued to grow with drive-in restaurants in Washington in the 40s and 50s, and finally opened their first hotel in 1957. Today, we're a global company with 3,000 hotels in almost 70 countries around the world. In the hotel real estate end, we focus on location, location, location. And of course, the National Press Club is in a great location right here in D.C., near the White House, and of course, next door to the JW Marriott Hotel, which we opened in 1984. We named it for my father, but I forgot to tell him about it. He showed up at the hotel and he said, "What's my name doing on this place?" And we said, "Well, we thought maybe since you started your business on 14th Street, we should name this hotel for you. It's come back to 14th Street." Now the JW Marriott brand is on 40 luxury hotels around the world. And across our 20 resort and hotel brands, we have 300,000 Marriott associates. Our company employs about half of them, and the other half work for our franchisees. My mom and dad believed in taking care of their people, and that became the foundation of our Marriott culture. They were always very grateful for the opportunity to build a successful business. And today, we believe that providing opportunity for people to grow in their careers is the engine for our global growth. I talked to a friend the other day on the phone who said, "I quote you often because 40 years ago you told me the best way to build a successful hotel chain is to find a good person and build a hotel around him." I said, "Well, that's a good slogan, but I don't think I ever said it. But anyway, I'll take it." Last year, I get out and I visit over 300 hotels around the world to make sure that we're doing a good job for our customers, but more importantly, to say thank you to our associates. I was visiting one of our D.C. hotels when I met Valerie McSwain. She's the concierge at the Washington Marriott. She'd come to work for us 11 years earlier because she wanted to go from welfare to work. Valerie told me how she'd been able to build a career and give her children an education. She has 2 sons at Morgan State University, a sophomore and a junior, and her daughter has earned a master's degree. When I met her, I was so impressed with her enthusiasm that I asked her to share her story on my blog, Marriott on the Move. Valerie is here today. Would you please stand, Valerie? Delighted to welcome you. Yeah, I'm a blogger. Had a time of my life this past year posting more than 75 blogs on Marriott.com, which is our home page. You can also book a room on Marriott.com, and my people tell me we've booked $3.5 million worth of rooms because of my blog, so I'm waiting for my commission. But I don't qualify, I'm afraid. The blog connects me very well with our guests and associates all over the world, and it's like talking to somebody really face-to-face. I'm certainly not a techie. I don't even own a computer, but I do record my blogs on a digital recorder, and one of my Gen Y associates downloads it to a podcast. It's really pretty cool. I've been able to share my ideas and my concerns with a global audience in the blogosphere, whatever that is. We even got some reporters who picked up news stories from the blog. I posted pictures from my hotel visits on Flickr, whatever that is. Today, Marriott has its own news site on YouTube with videos about some of our key initiatives. So you might say we've entered the age of Marriott 2.0. I'm not sure that my mom would have thought of all this, even though she was a modern woman for her times. And one of her legacies is in our audience today. Jimmy Pascal is our new Senior Vice President for External Affairs and Global Diversity. She worked for Marriott for 17 years, took a spin with a telecommunications startup, and then worked with Volunteers of America. She's now returned to Marriott just this week to head up our Global Diversity Program. We're proud of our efforts toward having 500 women and minority-owned hotels, and we've reached our goal to spend $1 billion with minority and women-owned suppliers 3 years ahead of schedule. Jimmy will take that program to a whole new level. She's a Washingtonian, the mother of 2 children, and another example of how providing opportunities to people makes our company successful. Jimmy, would you please stand? Thank you. As we celebrate Martin Luther King's birthday, I think often of the great speech he made at the Lincoln Memorial, where he articulated the dream that so many people share as we raise our families. Opportunities to share their talents and work in their communities. And at Marriott, we've seen many people who were not born in this country realize their dreams through hard work and good citizenship. That's why I'm passionate about immigration reform. I really believe we need to secure our borders. We lost a hotel on 9/11 in New York, which was located between the 2 towers at the World Trade Center. So I know how important it is that terrorism be stopped. But I also realize it's impossible to send 12 million undocumented immigrants home. We really need to cool the rhetoric and work together to come up with a federal solution, one that creates a workable verification system so that we employers know who we're hiring and who are authorized to work. Passing local laws is really very impractical for any national employer like us. With expected growth, the hospitality industry alone will need an additional 300,000 workers in the next 5 years. We need immigrant workers in our economy, and we need to create a system that keeps track of them and enables them to pursue a path to citizenship. One of our most successful employee programs is called Sed de Saber. That's Spanish for thirst for knowledge. Hundreds of our associates are enrolled in the program and learning critical English language skills because they want to be productive and provide for their families and realize their dream to become an American citizen. I hope in the coming year, even with all the campaign rhetoric, that we can move to a sober and strong discussion of immigration reform. Another issue that's very important to us and to our industry is removing the barriers to global travel. We need to make sure our visa and entry systems are more efficient and customer-friendly because we're losing a tremendous opportunity to bring visitors to America. The government has made some good progress, like the new China travel agreement they signed last month. This agreement will facilitate Chinese group travel to our country and be a big boon to our economy. But there are a lot of other areas for improvement. DHS and state need to make better use of technology to process people more effectively and share information among the different agencies to eliminate the bureaucracy and delay and duplication that takes place. For instance, somebody that has a valid visa has to leave the United States and go to another country and reapply in order to get an extension of their visa. It really doesn't make a lot of sense. And I'm afraid it's going to take a lot of government entities working together to fix the problem. Our industry needs to do our part, so we're working with Congress to get the funding DHS and state need to increase their staffing, to create better technology, to improve their infrastructure, and enhance their customer service. Travel is trade. When we sell a hotel room next door at the JW Marriott Hotel to a British person, that is an export. The research shows that positive views of our country are more than 40% higher among people who've come here and visited us than those who've never been. If you've traveled outside this country, seeing the Great Wall or the pyramids makes you fall in love with China and Egypt. It opens your mind to the hearts and to the culture and to the people. Here in the United States, we need to put out the welcome mat at our borders and airports and do the same with our embassies around the world. Security is obviously a top priority, but appropriate security processes must allow an open exchange of people, ideas, services, and products. This is so important to me and to our business. I've asked my daughter, Debbie Marriott Harrison, excuse me, Freudian slip, who heads up our government affairs, to do all she can to help fix the problem. She's worked in our hotels and she lived around the world. She reminds me a lot of my mother, who was a Republican National Committee woman in Washington and represented the party at several national conventions. When Mom was here in the summer of 1927, she was working in a root beer stand, and she got a day off, and she did as much sightseeing as she could do because she was afraid the company was not going to make it through the summer. And she said every Monday at 1 o'clock, you could go to the White House, stand in line, and go in the East Room and shake hands with the president. How times have changed. So I said, did you go? Oh, sure. She said, I went and stood in line. She was 19 years old, and she said, I got a big kick out of it. I said, who'd you meet? She said, I met Silent Calvin Coolidge. And he said, how do you do? And he moved me on, and that was all I got to say. And he said, but she always remembered it and talked about how much Washington had changed. Like her grandmother, Debbie understands the issues we're facing. She's a passionate advocate for Marriott. She has her grandmother's great diplomatic skills. I'm proud of her. Debbie's here today with her brother David. Would you both please stand? Now, after 80 years here in Washington, we still treasure our local roots. We know you have to be a good neighbor to be a good global citizen. An important part of being a good neighbor is to give back to the communities where we do business. These days, it's called corporate social responsibility, or CSR, and it's deeply embedded in our culture. We call it the spirit to serve. We've branded our global service initiatives around the world SERVE, S-E-R-V-E. S stands for shelter and food. E for the environment. R is for readiness for hotel careers. V is the vitality of children. And E is embracing diversity and people with disabilities. Here in Washington, we work with the D.C. Central Kitchen and the Capital Area Food Bank. Our associates participate in environmental cleanup projects throughout the region in places like Roosevelt Island. And we're partnering with the D.C. school system, with our Hospitality High School, where students are gaining hotel skills as well as regular high school requirements. Our Family Foundation is working through the United Negro College Fund and the Hispanic College Fund to fund scholarships for students pursuing hospitality careers. These Marriott scholars are mentored through the college years by our associates in the field and corporate leadership. And our foundation Bridges program trains and transitions high school students with disabilities for many, many different careers, not just in the hotel business. We're proud that more than 10,000 disabled young men and women have found meaningful employment since we founded the organization in 1990. We also work hard to be responsible stewards for the environment. Partnering with Conservation International, we're on our way to reducing the greenhouse gas emissions at our hotels around the world by 1 million tons. By conserving energy and water, and we're greening our supply chain and reducing, reusing, and recycling whatever we use. At our corporate headquarters building in Bethesda, the cafeteria has shifted to biodegradable plates and cutlery, and our drive to eventually be waste neutral as we work to reduce our footprint on the environment is underway. There's more we can do. Our Marriott Conference Centers at College Park is the country's first LEED certified hotel. I was in Baltimore a few weeks ago to break ground on the new LEED certified Marriott Fairfield Inn, the city's first LEED certified hotel. LEED stands for leadership in energy and environmental design, and we're going to have more of these green hotels in the future. As we close out our 80th year in business, it's fitting to remember how we started, by innovating, providing a great product, fostering a lasting service-focused culture, and being a good neighbor. The challenge today is to do it on a global scale, as these values sustain us in good times and bad. Keeping it all going is what keeps me up at night, because as my dad always said, success is never final. Thank you very much.
A reminder, if you have questions for our speaker, please write them on the cards at your table and pass them up to me. Let's begin up with this. What would you like to see in an economic stimulus package? And is such a stimulus package really necessary?
I think the first thing we want to see in any program we've got going in this country is to continue to reduce interest rates. I think that will have the most immediate impact. I think the speed of impact is what's most important to most of us. You're concerned about long-term solutions to problems because we need a quick fix, I think. I think we're headed into a rough patch, maybe a recession. Nobody really seems to know, but things are not as good as they were a year ago. We all know that. The credit crunch is a very serious concern. As far as economic stimulus packages are concerned, I think that we need to continue to keep taxes low. The last thing we need to do is have a dole and give out a lot of money and then raise taxes to cover it. We really need to be sensible and careful and cautious about what we do, but obviously the best and most immediate thing would be to continue to keep interest rates low and continue to lower them more. We need to straighten out this credit crunch and get it fixed as soon as we possibly can. And we really haven't carefully defined what it is yet. So banks have got to start lending again, and they've got to get back in business again, or the construction industry, particularly in the commercial construction, I think is in for serious times ahead. So there's a lot of moving parts to this and a lot of uncertainty and a lot of unknowns. But I think interest rates seem to be one of the key things that we need to keep doing. Thank you.
You talked about immigration. What do you think Congress should do to overhaul the immigration laws?
We need a verification system that works. We need to be able to, when somebody comes into our office for an job interview and presents their documents, we need to be able to check those documents against a verifiable system that says these documents are real and this person is in the country legally. And if we've got that verification system and that works and is sorted out, then I think we're a long way there to establishing that a person can work in this country and then apply for citizenship.
What do you say to the Republican leadership in Congress that has, is this a question of rights, has buckled to anti-immigrant sentiment to oppose comprehensive reform?
I think they're unrealistic. I think that they're not understanding what's going on in this country or not facing up to the fact that this country is powered really by immigrant labor. When you think about the fact that you get a pizza for $8 or $9 delivered to your house, most of that's by immigrant labor. I was in McDonald's having dinner last night with my grandchildren, and I looked in the kitchen, and there wasn't a single American-born person working in that kitchen. There were 15 or 20 people in there. Now, you know, you go around the neighborhoods, and all lawns are being mowed by immigrant labor. And you go in our hotels, we have as many as 29 languages in some of our hotels. So we could not stay in business if we didn't have immigrant labor. We just need to find a way to verify those who are here legally and help them get on a path to citizenship.
A political question, because after all, we're in Washington. Has the press and the public been fair to presidential candidate Mitt Romney in questioning how his Mormon faith will influence his presidency?
I don't think so. I think that there's been far too much energy around the religion issue. We're not electing a religious leader. We're electing a political leader. We're electing a leader for this country. I don't think there's ever been a political race in this country where religion has become the dominant force that it is in this election, and I think it's too bad, and I don't think it's necessary, and I think it's just focuses on the wrong things. He's a very good man. He's a good family man. He's a very able, competent person and would be, I think, a great president.
In the 1960s, Marriott competed with the Howard Johnson chain of hotels and restaurants. What did Marriott do that let it succeed and that Hojo didn't do?
Well, we were founded as a company with a very strict adherence to standards. My father was a stickler. He was a perfectionist, and he inspected kitchens until 2 and 3 in the morning. He was around the hot shops making sure the parking lots were hosed down every day. He was absolutely persnickety about the quality of the food to make sure it was as good as it could be. And these standards and this bedrock of high standards and great customer service is what's carried our company forward. And the basic culture that he established in the hot shop restaurants back in the 30s and 40s, we continue to carry forward in the hotel business today. And I think that's why around the world we are successful in the business, is because of our high standards and the emphasis we put on quality and quality control.
Are the rising costs of health care causing problems to Marriott and all of corporate America? What are the solutions to the health care issue?
I have no clue.
Does Congress need to pass an investment tax credit, similar to one passed during the Kennedy administration, as a way to stimulate business opportunities?
I think the investment tax credit was effective when it was passed. Our business relies tremendously on business investment. About 80% of the business done in the hotels in America today is as a result of business travel, conventions, and meetings, really funded by businesses. So if business is healthy in this country, then the country will be healthy. And, you know, the business drives jobs, the business drives employment levels and income levels. The more research and development that companies do, the more competitive globally they become. If they can write off some of these research and investments quicker and faster, then they will have, they'll invest more and they'll be more profitable and everybody will benefit. I think it's a good program.
Speaking of taxes, do you favor an increase in the federal gas tax to build or expand roads?
I'm not sure about that. I'm not an expert on funding the roads programs in this country, but you know, there may be an opportunity to have more toll roads. I grew up on the toll roads because back in the days in the 50s, the hot shops were all over all the toll roads all the way from Florida up to Maine. And I think the toll roads have been good, and I think maybe we need a few more toll roads that can help pay for these bridges. Let the people that use the roads pay for the bridges rather than put a gas tax on that everybody has to pay.
You have several questions about your green initiative. This questioner writes, Marriott has made a commitment to reduce greenhouse emissions, but I have never seen any recycling containers at Marriott properties that guests could use. Would you consider expanding the company's commitment to the environment by starting and promoting a recycling program at your properties?
Yes, we would. We're working on it. We think it's very, very important. One of the green issues we do have is there's a card in most of our rooms which says if you stay more than one night and you do not want to put your towel in the laundry, then you can hang it up. Otherwise, put it on the floor and we'll wash it for you. But if you keep it for 2 or 3 days, that's less water, less heat, and less environmental impact. So we're working on that, but recycling is good. We do it at corporate. We do it in our hotels and the kitchens. And we really would love to have a way to easily have our guests participate in recycling.
What factors led to the Green Marriott program?
Well, we understand that's a major issue with our guests, with our employees, with communities in which we live and serve. And we really do want to be a steward of our environment. When you travel to our hotels around the world, so many of them are in resorts. The resort areas are very, very sensitive. I was in Fort Lauderdale during the holidays. They turn off the lights down there on the Fort Lauderdale beach from March 1st through December 1st. Although there's an increase in crime and although it's very inconvenient, the turtles do reproduce when the lights are off. So to get the turtles to reproduce, the lights go off. And everybody in the hospitality industry is supportive of this, although it is a very hard thing for us to operate with all the lights off on the beach. But their turtles are doing great. Thank you very much.
What impact has the Green program had on your business, and what can other businesses learn from what you're doing?
I think it's increased our perception among our guests and our employees and also the communities in which we serve that we're a good citizen, that we're doing our part to help in the environment. And I think people in the industry really need to embrace this, think about it, think what they can do to. I think all of us now are using these little lights that last forever and use less energy that look like a corkscrew or something. They're funny looking little white lights that go on, and they do put out a good light in the room. And so I think that there's just many, many things we can do and continue to do. We're always looking for new ways to reduce our impact on the environment.
This questioner wants to know about another recycling issue, if there is one. People check in, use the little soaps once or twice, and then leave them behind. What do you do with all those soaps?
We get rid of them. I don't think anybody in this room would want to use somebody else's soap.
Can you please speak to branding? What does it mean to you to be the brand?
Well, if I am the brand, I don't think I am the brand, but the fact that our name is over the door of the hotels in which we operate and serve, it just gives an added sense of responsibility. It gives me another reason to stay up at night and worry about the fact that everything is going as well as it should go. There's an added sense of duty, an added sense of responsibility, an added sense of commitment that comes from the family's involvement in the business, the fact that the business has been around for 80 years and has grown from a root beer stand to what it is today based on family values and the values of our associates and people who visit with us and stay with us. It's a very big responsibility.
A lot of questions about the Marriott overseas. This questioner wants to know, what is the process you use to evaluate or enter a country in which you are not present?
Well, the key to that answer to that question is go to the countries where the business is good. And, right now we only have 2 hotels in Vietnam. Vietnam is one of the hottest markets in the world for the hotel business. We're continuing to work hard to get into that country and would do more there. But, it follows the old adage, you get into a war, the country that you're in war with, when you go home, they always do very well. Japan and Germany being wonderful examples. Vietnam is now coming on very strong. Business is outstanding. We look for opportunities. We won't go into a country unless the country is beginning to boom. Sub-Saharan Africa is beginning to come back very strong, and we're looking at opportunities there in many countries. And so we continue to search the world for opportunities where we can do well and provide a good service and a good product.
How do you choose the right employees and associates in other nations?
We screen our people. I've often said we hire friendly and train technical, and that's what we really do. We hire people who want to serve. We look for people who are happy and have a smile and are excited about this business and looking for a career in this business. And, again, I was in Fort Lauderdale. We had 2 employees there who were from India. They were here on a 6-month work visa, and they were going back to India, and we're going to work on our hotels back in India. And we're excited about the fact that they got to train here in the United States and to learn our customs and our procedures and how we do business here, and they're taking them back to their home country. But we look for people who are friendly, who want to serve, who want to work in this business, and who have an appetite for growth and opportunity.
Some of the areas you're expanding in, like India, like China, are areas that are directly competing with us in other sectors or considered less than ideal for American travel. Are you concerned about the implications for American-owned properties in these areas?
The American-owned properties in America or the American-owned properties?
Overseas.
Most American-owned, there are hardly any American-owned properties overseas. We don't own a single hotel outside the United States. We have a lease on a hotel in Frankfurt, Germany, and that's about as close as we get. So what we do is we work with local developers and partners. We manage on their behalf, or we sometimes let them franchise our name if we have tight controls over what they do. But our investment outside the United States is very, very tiny. And the hotels outside the United States are almost 100% owned by others.
This questioner wants to know if the reputation of the United States abroad, which he says is sinking, has that affected your industry?
No, it really hasn't. Our reputation abroad for American brands is terrific. The Chinese, the Russians, all these various countries around the world really love American brands. And that's why one of the reasons why we're successful overseas. We've opened a Ritz-Carlton in downtown Moscow right on Red Square, which is extremely successful. And again, it's the branding. And it's just thrilling to see how people around the world embrace American brands. Whether it's Starbucks or McDonald's or Marriott or whatever it is, they really flock to the good old American brands.
What are some of the secrets of building a successful family business in today's global economy?
Well, we are a family business, and we try and treat our associates like members of our family. We try to treat them fairly. We try and give them opportunities. And when they need help, we give them help. We train them as best as we can, and we encourage them to stay with us. I was talking to an executive the other day who was commuting out of another city to Washington, and I said, "You moved your family back home?" And he said, "Well, we love the city that we came from. And when I came to Marriott 5 years ago," he said, "I thought, we'd leave in 5 years." But he says, "We're staying, and we don't want to stay." And we found out nobody leaves Marriott. Well, they do, but we don't want them to. And we really want our people in our company to feel like they're members of our family and treat them that way.
We have a request for a financial tip. Is Marriott stock a good buy at the current price?
I always believe Marriott's always a good buy. Thank you.
What has been the impact of Marriott's no smoking policies?
It's been extremely favorably received. Over 95% of our guests have written us and told us that they really are in favor of this. There are just a few who have said they're concerned about it because they can't smoke anymore, but even those people, I've talked to several of them, told me that they did never want to stay in a smoking room because it smelled so bad when they moved in, all they were smokers. And so it's taken all the smell of the smoke out of all of our rooms. We don't have to worry anymore about keeping rooms aside for people who smoke and finally ending up putting non-smokers in smoking rooms. It's just simplified our business, and it's made our rooms fresher and cleaner and better, and it's a win-win for the company and for the customer.
As a follow-up to that, the questioner wants to know what happened after that cigar event at your hotel.
Not much.
We have a lot of questions about the future of the company. This questioner wants to know if Marriott will consider getting back into senior living facilities. With the baby boom generation being there are predictions of a growing market in that area.
We know the baby boomers are growing because we're putting a lot of them up in our hotels. We do not want to get back into that business. We are committed to being a lodging business and timeshare business, taking care of people away from home in a lodging setting. And the baby boomers are a tremendous, tremendous market for us today. We're doing a lot of business with them, and we're excited about the future of more business with them.
Do you miss the restaurants?
Almost half our sales are still restaurants, so I can't say I miss the restaurants. We're in them and we're working them, and it's still as hard as it always was, but it's a lot easier to sell rooms than it is prepare and deal with food. But it's a major emphasis of our company today, just as it has been for 80 years.
I know you were on the turnpikes, as we said earlier, and and the restaurants have been around. Do you think that helped grow, and how did that help grow the Marriott brand originally, and has that translated to the hotel business?
Well, as I said earlier, our roots are basically in the restaurant business. We develop standards in the restaurant business, and all of our hotels have standards that they follow. The other hotel chains were started out basically as a conglomeration of different hotels that were acquired under one roof. For the first many, many years, all of the hotels that we developed, we developed ourselves. We didn't buy anything until 1968, 10 or 11 years after we got into the business. Everything we built and developed ourselves. So we were able to put in our own standards, which came from the restaurant business. Our system of operations is a restaurant operating system, where we have a district manager over 6 or 8 hotels. We used to have a district manager over 6 or 8 restaurants. We had standard recipes in our restaurants. We have standard recipe cards in our hotels. We have standard ways of making up the room, 66 different steps to make up and clean a guest room. These things we established as we went along because this is what we'd learned and developed and made us successful in the restaurant business.
When you first made the trek east to Washington, the family, did they ever think that Marriott would be what it is today?
They really didn't. As I said, my mom didn't think she was going to get through the first summer, so she did as much sightseeing as she could do in Washington because she didn't think she'd ever be here again. And my father was always afraid of failure and was very, very, very conservative. In fact, when we built our first hotel at Twin Bridges here in Washington, the cost of the hotel was $3 million. It was 365 rooms. That was back in 1957. He borrowed more money than he ever thought he'd have to borrow to build this hotel, and he went public with the company because of it, because he didn't want to put the debt on his own balance sheet. So he would have been, I think, pleased and surprised, but he would have been worried about all the debt that we have today.
Question I got several cards on. What are your future plans? Are you ever going to retire?
My wife said she married me, for better, for worse, and not for lunch, and I always say that the food in the employee cafeteria is better than the tuna fish sandwiches I get at home. So I'm going to hang around and do the best I can to continue to be involved in the business. And I love the business. It's my life. It's my vocation. It's my avocation, and I'll work in it as long as I possibly can.
Is it your hope that eventually a third-generation Marriott will take over?
Well, you always have hopes that your kids are going to do well, and they are doing well, and I'm not going to say any more.
How is the credit crunch affecting any Marriott expansion plans? Is the problem limited to the United States, or is it global?
Well, right now, it's too early to tell. Basically, the smaller hotels that we're developing, the Residence Inn, the Courtyards, the Fairfield Inns, are mostly being developed by local developers who use their local banks. And as you may have read in the Wall Street Journal, the local banks are not really being affected. It's the big money center banks that are cutting back on their lending, and we've not been in the market recently for a major mortgage on a big hotel, nor have many of our developers. So we'll have to wait and see. In 6 months, I can give you a much better answer. I hope by then it's all fixed.
With the decline of the U.S. dollar overseas, are you seeing an influx of foreign visitors? And if not, how are you going to get them over here?
We are seeing an influx, but nowhere near what it should be. I think that the number of visitors to the United States in 2007 was up about 10% from 2006. But the United States continues to lose market share in world travel. Between 2000 and 2007, we have lost about several points of market share in world travel. And one of the reasons is the bad perception of our visa program and our entry system. It's too tough to visit America. It's too hard to get a visa. And the other problem is there's a lack of promotional dollars on the part of the United States government. They don't spend 10 cents around the world to promote our country. And we're in last place in tourism dollars spent in the major countries of the world. Countries like Iceland spend more money generating visitors for their country than we do. Roger Dow, who's sitting here to my left in his Travel Industry of America, is working very hard with Congress to get them to fund some travel dollars to get people to visit America. It would be a tremendous export boom for America if more people would come here and spend money. We're a shopping bonanza for the Brits, who it's a 2-to-1 deal. It's a 50% discount coming over here with their pound and turning it into dollars. So. And we have seen a lot of British come, and more Germans came this last year, but we can do a lot better.
Is there any way to encourage those who are concerned about the recession or security to come to the U.S.?
Well, I think the fact that we haven't had a security issue in this country since 9/11 has been fantastic. And I don't think they should be concerned about security. I think if we can continue to resolve the visa issues and enable people to get here easily, it's going to help a lot. Brazil, for instance, is a country as large as the United States, and they have 4 consulate offices in Brazil where the citizens of Brazil can apply for a visa. So if you travel 400 miles with your wife and 3 kids to get a visa, and you get there and one of the kids is turned down, you're not going to do this again, and you're going to go someplace else for your vacation. So we really need to continue to work hard with Homeland Security as well as state to try and straighten these issues out. There's just been a report released by the Homeland Security and State Department. A study was done by an independent commission of which I'm a member, which was submitted yesterday and accepted. And now they've got to work on some of the recommendations. But there were a lot of good, strong recommendations in this program, which would, if taken care of, would go a long way toward improving the process.
What are the differences among your various brands and between the hotel and the timeshare?
Well, people travel and select a hotel based on the purpose of their trip. And if they're going to want a luxury hotel and they've got to entertain a big business client, then Ritz-Carlton is for them. If they're taking their kids to Florida for a week Disney World, and they'll stop at a Fairfield Inn on the way, and we have, Residence Inn for people who are on business assignments and staying for 2 or 3 weeks. They have their own kitchen, they can cook. We have Courtyard for the business traveler who's got a 10, 12-hour stay and wants to get in and out and on their way. And we've got the Marriott brands and the Renaissance brands. So we have a brand for every trip purpose. And timeshare is basically a paid vacation. When you buy a timeshare for a week or 2 weeks, you're guaranteeing that you're going to take a vacation every year for at least a week or 2 weeks. And so it's a very different business, but in a way it's very similar. A lot of our hotel customers own timeshare, and they work very well together.
This questioner wants to know about those recommendations in the report you just mentioned.
Well, too many to list, but several of them involve what happens to a person who applies for a visa and is turned down. And the process for getting that fixed needs to be really addressed, because they're turned down a lot of the times because they didn't fill the form out right, or there's some legal reason. And they really haven't caught, I don't think, hardly any terrorists as a result of this very complex visa system that we have. One of the recommendations that we're asking them to look at is video conferencing, that they can approve a visa for a person who's maybe had a prior visa by getting them on a video and talking to them and making sure that they have the proper documentation. The fact that if I have a 6-month visa, as a businessman, I'm on here assignment for a year, I've got to leave the United States and have my visa renewed in another country. So they're all going to Canada to have their visa renewed in the U.S. Embassy in Canada, or the consulate in Toronto, or wherever they're going. And so this needs to be studied hard. It's just very difficult for people who have a visa, who've been proven, who've been through the process, who've been fingerprinted, who've been interviewed, to have to go through the process every 6 months all over again. And that's this kind of bureaucracy that's building up as a result of trying to stop terrorism has got to be simplified. State and Homeland Security really got to work more closely together to resolve some of these issues and move very quickly on them, because it takes a long time, as you know, to get this kind of thing resolved.
You talk about the desire for foreign tourists. What do your American hotels do to make it easier for non-English speaking guests when they come there?
Well, many of the non-speaking English guests come as part of a tour group with their own translator, and particularly if they're coming from China or from Japan. And most of the citizens of Western Europe do speak some English. We do, where we can, in our bigger hotels, we have name badges with the flag of the country that the employee is from. So we have translators embedded in all of our big hotels that can handle most of the languages. As I mentioned earlier, we have as many as 29 different languages spoken by our employees in our hotels, and not a very big hotel, a 400-room hotel in Minneapolis. So you could think that we do have people on staff who can translate.
We're almost out of time, but before asking the last question, we have a few matters to take care of. First, let me remind members of future speakers. Later this month, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid will be delivering their annual pre-buttal to President Bush's State of the Union address. Then on February 14th, Ted Danson, the actor and activist and board member of Oceana, will be speaking. And on February 29th, our luncheon guest will be Dr. Andrew von Eschenbach, the FDA Commissioner. Second, I'd like to present our guest with the National Press Club coffee mug. Perfect for carrying around a hot beverage when you're inspecting your hotel rooms. And also a certificate of appreciation for appearing here today. And a copy of our new centennial video, the National Press Club, A Century of Headlines.
Thank you very much.
For our last question, you've been married for 50 years while constantly being on the road. What's your secret?
52 years. Just say yes.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming today. I'd also like to thank National Press Club staff members Melinda Cook, Pat Nelson, Joanne Booz and Howard Rothman for organizing today's lunch, and thanks to the Eric Friedheim Library at the National Press Club for its research. The video archive of today's luncheon is provided by the National Press Club Broadcast Operations Center. Press Club members can get free transcripts of our luncheons at our website, www.press.org. Non-members may buy transcripts, audio tapes, and videotapes by calling 1-888-343-1940. And for more information about joining the Press Club, please call us at area code 202-662-7511. Thank you very much again. We're adjourned.
Well done. Jennifer, great seeing you again, as always. All right. Good job on that show. Sam in there. Good stuff. Thank you, Jonathan, for those kind words. It's really great to be here in Washington, my hometown, with so many friends from the hospitality industry and the press and news. I'm a little bit of a news junkie, I guess, and I love to read newspapers. I'm one of the few left that does, I presume, but during my vacation, during the holidays in Florida, they sent me up as many newspapers in the hotel they could find, and I got a big kick, of course, out of reading the New York Post, which you never read here in Washington. But I did run across an analysis of various newspapers, which some of you may have heard before. And this little survey talks about the many newspapers that come across our desks and says that the Wall Street Journal is read by people who run the country. The Washington Post is read by people who think they run the country. The New York Times is read by people who think they should run the company and who are very good at crossword puzzles. The USA Today is read by people who think they ought to run the country and don't really understand the New York Times. They do, however, like their statistics shown in pie charts.
Earl's Ice Cream Parlors. The Marriott's name means Ritz-Carlton and Renaissance and Residence Inn and Courtyard. Today, Marriott is to hotels what McDonald's is to fast food. And if you ever forget the name of the company's founder, just look at the hotel next to the Press Club, the J.W. Marriott. Today's speaker, John Willard Marriott, Jr., known as Bill, is the son of the person whose name is on that hotel. Bill Marriott is the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Marriott International. The company is regularly named by Fortune magazine as one of the best places to work. As Mr. Marriott told the Washington Post, it's basic Christian principles: treating your people right, loving your people, and if you love them, they'll do anything for you, and your customers will get wonderful service. Marriott is in the midst of an effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 1 million tons by the end of the decade. He has pushed for simpler ways for foreign visitors to enter the United States and for ways to allow undocumented immigrants to stay here legally. The Marriotts are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and you'll find the Book of Mormon in their hotel rooms alongside the Gideon Bible. For president, they're supporting fellow LDS Church member Mitt Romney, whose given name is Willard, named for the original J. Willard Marriott. In fact, Governor Romney used to sit on the Marriott board. And unlike other hotel chains, Marriott has refused to enter the gaming industry. Still, Mr. Marriott has been criticized because the televisions at his hotels contain adult content. Mr. Marriott and his daughter, Donna, have 3 sons and a daughter, all of whom work in the family business. One answer we're waiting for is whether one of them will take over the company when Mr. Marriott retires. As for the immediate future, Mr. Marriott is planning boutique hotels with designer Ian Schrager. As the father of a 10-year-old, I'm much more excited about his plans to open a chain of family-oriented resorts with Nickelodeon. And Mr. Marriott, I understand you shared the stage with SpongeBob and got slimed. There's a story Mr. Marriott often tells, but he's not going to tell it today, so I will. A traveling salesman comes to breakfast in the hotel dining room and asks the waitress for some eggs over easy and some kind words. She comes back with the food, and as she turns to leave, the salesman says, "What about those kind words?" The waitress replies, "Don't eat them eggs." Let's welcome Bill Marriott to the National Press Club. Press Club, and editor of the club's centennial book, Reliable Sources. Skipping over our speaker for a moment, Deborah Silameo, Senior Vice President of Hager Sharp, and the Press Club's Speakers Committee member who organized today's luncheon. And Deborah, thank you very much for your work. Arnie Sorensen, Chief Financial Officer of Marriott. Lorraine Wohlert, my colleague at Bloomberg News. Andy Glass, Senior Editor at Politico. Pat Cheney, Executive Director of the National Coalition on Healthcare and Chair of the National Press Club's Travel Committee, and Jim Asiendo, News Director of WAMU 88.5. Decades ago, when my family drove from New York to Washington, we'd stop at the service areas along Interstate 95 at the signs that said, "Hot Shoppies." Years later, I learned two things. First, they were the seedlings of what would grow into one of the world's largest hotel chains, a $16 billion corporation, Marriott International. And second, they were pronounced hot shops. Today, instead of hot shops and Roy Rogers and Rustler Steakhouses and, alas, Good afternoon and welcome to the National Press Club. I'm Jonathan Salant, a reporter for Bloomberg News and the immediate past president of the club. I'd like to welcome club members and their guests in the audience today, as well as those you watching on C-SPAN. We're looking forward to today's speech, and afterwards, I will ask as many questions from the audience as time permits. Please hold your applause during the speech, so we have time for as many questions as possible. For our broadcast audience, I'd like to explain that if you hear applause, it is from the guests and the members of the general public who attend our luncheons, not from the working press. I'd now like to introduce our head table guests and ask them to stand briefly when their names are called. From your right, Suzanne Struglinski of the Deseret Morning News and president of the Regional Reporters Association. Tonya Fitzpatrick, Deputy Assistant Secretary for the U.S. Department of Education and the host of the Traveling On radio show on WWRC. Kathleen Matthews, Executive Vice President for Global Communications and Public Affairs of Marriott International. Jennifer Habercorn of the Washington Times. Roger Dow, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Travel Industry Association. Gil Klein, a past President of the National